for 5 years of assistance to maternal and child health. So if anybody wants to understand how priorities are out of whack, that's pretty dramatic. In terms of the shortfall, we are at this moment in time something like $10 to $11 billion short of what is required in 2010, and we will continue to be equal or greater amount short in the years between now and 2015. And that, of course, is what is agitating this AIDS conference, because we could be making breakthroughs, and yet the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria will be desperately underfunded at the replenishment conference this fall, and the presidential initiative in the United States is flatlining. I am, as you've identified, a Canadian, but it is hard for any of us to believe, who put so much trust and confidence in the new President of the United States, that this would be happening under the Obama administration. It's almost beyond the capacity of the mind to cope with that George Bush seemingly was more engaged in the battle against HIV than Barack Obama.
You said in a news conference just after the G8 summit in your country, in Toronto, that the G8 are congenitally addicted to betraying Africa. Why?
Why? Because the most obvious example recently, although this goes back over 30, 40, or 50 years of structural adjustment programs, berserk and lunatic economic applications, which stripped the social sectors of Africa at the behest of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In terms of the G8 governments themselves, in Gleneagles in 2005, they promised solemnly, they signed, they swore in blood, as it were, that they would double the aid to Africa, so that Africa would receive $25 billion additional by 2010, and they have received something like $10 to $13 billion. So they aren't even halfway there. How can that be described as anything other than a betrayal?
And Ambassador Lewis, can you talk more about this microbicide that's getting a lot of attention now at the conference and around the world?
Yes, we've been trying for so long. I say we, that's presumptuous. The scientists have been trying for so long to discover a vaccine or a microbicide. A microbicide is a gel or a foam or a cream vaginally applied for a period of time before and again after intercourse, which can prevent transmission of the virus. And it gives women some significant control over their own sexuality. We have made some breakthroughs. There are intimations of progress in the realm of a vaccine, but we're still probably many years off. Today there was an announcement of a microbicide which draws upon one of the antiretroviral drugs. It's really very artful and inspired as a base for the foam or the gel or the cream, and it's showing over 1 year a 50% protection, and over 2.5 years a 39% protection. And that decline in protection is simply a matter of adhering to the regimen, and that can be corrected. But frankly, in the realm of preventive interventions, 39%, 50%, that's astonishingly high at the start. And it means that as they refine this microbial gel, it will get better and better, and it is an exciting day for the science against the virus.
Ambassador Lewis, a World Bank study says payments to girls in poor countries can slow the spread of HIV. Can you explain?
Yes, these are transfer payments from the central government of countries to sustain families where girls are living in child-headed households, that is, households where both parents have been lost to the pandemic of AIDS and the oldest sibling in the family looks after the younger siblings, or households which are looked after by grandmothers, or girls who are having trouble staying in school because they have to leave to look after sick and ailing parents. And if there are transfer payments, and they can be extremely small, they can be just a couple of dollars in the course of a month, it can allow a girl to stay in school, it can allow for some further nutritious food for the family, it can allow the young girl to begin to play too soon, too prematurely in life, an adult role in the absence of parents, but a role which is indispensable to her development and to the family survival.
Well, on this issue of funding, Ambassador Lewis, Clinton in his comments said that aid groups should remember that countries are awash in trouble over the economic crisis, that donations are more difficult to come by because of the recession. How has the Obama administration responded to this criticism of funding?
Well, dare I describe that? I better say that I sit on President Clinton's Health Access Initiative board, and I think what the Clinton Foundation has done in Africa and does in Africa is possibly the most admirable intervention there is. So please take what I'm about to say with the caution with which it's imbued. That's a kind of neoliberal position for a neoliberal administration. The truth of the matter is that when the financial crisis hit the United States, President Obama and his colleagues were able to find some trillions of dollars between a combination of stimulus funds on the one hand and bailing out the banks on the other to maintain some kind of economic equilibrium in the economy. I should point out that the banks are now experiencing large profits again, and the economy is still in terrible shape, witness the unemployment. What we are asking for, let's take the Global Fund as an example, is $1 billion additional dollars per year for 3 years. That's less than 1/10 of 1% of the money that's being spent on stimulus and bailing out the banks. It is so microscopic as to be barely discernible, and yet it would save millions of lives. I go back to President Clinton's statement that every dollar wasted puts a life at risk. Every dollar the United States refuses to contribute based on a commitment which was made. President Obama, during the election campaign, said he would provide, and he actually signed this, as did Hillary Clinton, as did Joe Biden, $50 billion over 5 years for AIDS alone. And they have retreated and backtracked from that dramatically. And forgive me, but that will be counted in human lives.
Stephen Lewis, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention here in the United States recently released a first-of-its-kind analysis showing that 2.1% of heterosexuals living in high-poverty urban areas in the United States are infected with HIV. The analysis suggests that many low-income cities across the United States now have generalized HIV epidemics as defined by the UN Joint Program on HIV/AIDS, UNAIDS. Your response?
Well, that's frankly terrifying and deeply upsetting. The definition of a generalized epidemic is anything over 1%. To think that there are poor urban cores in the United States that have over 2% is amazing. It's heartbreaking. And of course, it is particularly pronounced amongst the African American population. And there's no question that women, African American women, in the prime of their life, in their reproductive years, AIDS has now become the single highest killer, not widely recognized. So the United States must have an internal indigenous policy, which is as strong as some of the international policies are. And President Obama, to be fair, has just announced a new policy applicable to the United States. The activist advocates who have achieved so much are critical of that policy. They don't think it's adequately funded, and they're not sure, they're not confident of its implementation. And indeed, President Clinton in his speech pointed out that there were some thousands of people on the waiting list for treatment even in the United States. That again takes one's breath away. So you see, on so many fronts, this international emergency, whose carnage is indescribable in the world, with 33 million people still living with AIDS, the passivity, the indifference, the criminal delinquence in the response that continues when we've made progress and we could turn it around. Why in heaven's name are they slowing down now?
Stephen Lewis, we want to thank you very much for being with us from Vienna, from the International AIDS Conference. He's former Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa, former Canadian Ambassador to the United Nations, and co-director of AIDS Free World, an international AIDS advocacy group that's based here in New York. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.